And I will try to keep my remarks brief because, frankly, a couple of the other speakers, I think, touched on much of what I am interested in myself. Cassandra, especially with the Drug Policy Alliance, I would just love to second everything she says. My name is Rebecca Tone. I'm a staff attorney at the Legal Aid Bureau in the city of Buffalo. So I'm a public defender. I've worked in city court in Buffalo for about 8 years now. And we certainly, since decriminalization, have seen the number of arrests in Buffalo go down to some degree. But Andrea O'Sullivan from the Open Buffalo Institute spoke already about how those numbers are still higher than they frankly should be. But what's most shocking about our numbers in Buffalo, even though I see it on a first-hand basis every day, I think these numbers are always a bit shocking, that 71% of arrests made by the Buffalo Police Department for marijuana possession are people of color. The racial disparities that we see throughout the criminal justice system are especially prevalent, and I think all of the drug prosecutions and marijuana in particular. So I would like to focus my talk today less on some of the collateral consequences of the arrests, which I know some other criminal defense attorneys will be speaking about, and talk a little more specifically about the link between marijuana prohibition and racial profiling. And I'd like to talk about it very specifically in the terms of pretextual stops and more aggressive and intrusive policing practices like that, because there's an area in particular where we try as public defenders to address racial profiling. We try to address constitutional violations every day in the courtroom, but the reality is that when it comes to pretextual stops, that is simply not a battle that we can win in the courtrooms, and we really do need the legislature to push for a complete legalization. In my experience, those aggressive tactics like pretextual stops, which essentially is when an officer, as you know, would need something more than just a hunch to randomly stop someone on the street. They need it when they stop somebody for a vehicle and traffic stop as well, if they're pulling over a car. But an officer is allowed under the doctrine of law to pull someone over for a valid vehicle and traffic stop when their intent and their sole purpose is really to try to investigate for drugs. So they now, all of a sudden, legally, officers can act on nothing more than a hunch and really have the power to pull over just about any car they want. You follow any car long enough, odds are you're going to catch some late blinker, maybe a tail light that isn't as bright as the officer thinks it should be. And so they really do have a nearly unlimited power to stop a car.
Following too close.
Yes, I mean, really anything. I could be stopped, you know, for a number of bases every time I step behind the wheel, but I'm not anyway. So with this unlimited power and officers being able to suddenly act on a hunch, too often, whether it's conscious or many times unconsciously, the race of the person who is driving that vehicle is going to become a factor to some degree in the cars that are being pulled over to make these stops. And because the courts have said that that's absolutely permissible, there's really very little we as attorneys can do in the courtroom to address that. When we are asking police to uncover evidence of drug possession, it really does encourage more aggressive policing tactics. The crime of drug possession generally involves a private transaction between consenting individuals. Evidence is going to be concealed in your glove compartment, your pants pocket, or a bedside table. There are rarely civilian complaints to open a case. Police use much more intrusive tactics like these pretext stops or stop and frisk policies in order to initiate their investigations. What it frankly comes down to is whether or not the police, when they're making a stop, a random suspicionless stop, think that their odds of finding an arrest at the end of the stop are good enough. That after enough suspicionless stops, you're going to make a few arrests at the end of the day, and that those numbers are going to justify this type of a practice. Well, drug possession is in some areas very, very common. We know marijuana possession has become more and more common amongst blacks and whites, even to a higher degree with our white population. And so when we still leave the power for police to make arrests in marijuana enforcement, they might not be putting you in jail overnight, but they have the same power to effectuate an arrest. They have the same power to pull over a car. They have the same incentive to stop whatever cars they want and to use these suspicionless stop and aggressive policing practices if they think that finding any amount of marijuana is going to open a door either for further investigation or it's going to give them a number in the books at the end of the day. They're going to come to court on that arrest addressed, and they're going to get their overtime, and it's going to continue to fuel that cycle. And since, unfortunately, this is not something we're able to be as effective as I would like to be as a public defender in our criminal courts, I'm here asking the legislature today to please go all the way and legalize marijuana, because the decriminalization that we've seen just has not gone far enough to address some of the racial disparate treatment that we've heard about from others and that you're going to continue to hear about today. Thank you.